Hey everyone, it's the Mike Gormley Show. Thanks so much for coming back in. On the way out to a commercial, we listened to Dylan's "It Ain't Me, Babe," and coming back in was, of course, with Maggie's Farm, and um, and we were with Ira Ingber, who has is an by the way an excellent guitarist, an excellent record producer. The guy's got a lot of experience under his belt, and a lot of that was with Bob Dylan. Now. Uh, we were talking the other day, Ira, and you mentioned that there's parts of his life where the spotlight's on him, and he doesn't necessarily go away, but it dies down a little bit, and then there's something else, and then there's something else, and the something else now
Mhm.
is the new film, and no, when I'm going to say No Direction Home, that's not the film.
That was the other one.
Uh,
That was the other 15 minutes of fame.
yeah, exactly.
Complete
Uh,
unknown. Complete unknown.
it's what is the name of the film? I'm going to blank
Complete
on it.
unknown.
Oh, that's right, A Complete Unknown,
Mhm.
which is an ironic title, but I'm sure it comes from the
Well,
song.
it's from like a Rolling Stone.
Right. Um, we should admit that neither one of us have seen the movie.
Well, you admit it first, then I'll agree.
Okay. Um, but I would say I've studied the movie without actually sitting down watching the whole thing. So I'm not completely ignorant about what's going on there. And there's a lot of criticism, which happens around Dylan a fair amount. Um, and I wanted to read something from The Atlantic, if you can. It's a bit lengthy, but we'll get through it, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
It says James Mangold's A Complete Unknown, like all the best movies about rock stars, is a fairy tale. James Parker writes, it dramatizes, mythicizes, elasticizes, and tosses twinkling magic showbiz confetti over the period between Dylan's absolutely unheralded arrival in New York in 1961 and his honking, abrasive, ain't gonna work on Maggie's Farm no more headline and appearance 4 years later at the Newport Folk Festival, where his new electric sound drove the old folkies berserk, and the crowd, at least in Mangold's movie, bayed for his blood. Um, one of the young Bob Dylan's foundational fibs was that he had learned his songcraft while traveling with a carnival. Parker continues. Carnies quote, understand instinctively, animalistically, sometimes that life is theater, that people will believe what they want to, and that all the most essential things happen to the imagination. Was young Bob a carny? He wanted to be, Parker writes. His identity was a performance. His writing was sleight of hand. He wowed and bamboozled his own audience. And when in A Complete Unknown, he tries out the carnival story on Joan Baez, played by Monica Barbaro, she looks at him and says, thrillingly deadpan, you are so completely full of, which we got a radio show. We can't say the word, but that you're completely full of, people will know what, which is exactly what you say to a carny. A little bit more. In the Newport scenes, the movie really does some fancy shuffling of events, Parker writes. No one at the festival shouted Judas at Dylan. That wouldn't happen until the show the following year in Manchester, England. One biographer has argued that much of the Newport audience would have known what to expect from Dylan, and his keyboardist has said that most of the crowd enjoyed Dylan's performance. But so what? A Completely Unknown is a movie, and a movie, or a movie like this, which in one sense is a parable of artistic ruthlessness, needs a climax. And Bob Dylan, more than most rock stars, is a myth, Parker continues. He made himself up, he disappeared himself, and in doing so, he became a lens. Rays of otherworldly insight poured through him, and he trained them upon us like somebody frying ants with a magnifying glass.
That's great.
So that's a
Yeah.
long quote. Sorry about that, folks, but
No, I think there's everything about what you just read from this fellow supports the a view I have.
Mhm. But
However,
it's somehow not a negative view.
no, it's not negative. I think in some ways I have huge amount of admiration and respect for someone who was able to pull this thing off. I should mention to the listeners here, I'm related to Bob through marriage,
Oh,
distant,
really?
Distantly, yeah, we're both Jews from Minnesota, and my aunt, who married into the family, was I think a second cousin or some relation to Bob's mother. And when I told Bob, and I finally figured out who the link person was that connected us. And I said, Bob, there's only 30 or 40,000 Jews in Minnesota. Of course we're going to be related. And his response was, and I didn't know a single one, which of course is a lie. Because then I mentioned this fellow, his name was Ronnie Heiligman, and he stopped in his tracks. He said, Ronnie Heiligman, he saved my life. And like I brought him back to this dream from 1950, whatever it was, because I was in Minneapolis. Bob was up north, and he came down to Minneapolis, not knowing anybody. And my extended family took him in. And my aunt called him Bobby. When I was working with him in the 80s, I said, well, I'm working with Bob. What are you doing? I'm working with Bobby. Oh, you're working with Bobby. That's so great. He was Bobby. So anybody who could have done what he did to that extent to truly change the world, uh, I don't criticize it at all. It's an explanation of
Mhm.
how he did it. It's not a critique of how he did it at all.
Uh, Well, obviously, the Atlanta fellow in the Atlantic, I got a feeling he didn't like the idea that there were these made up parts, but reportedly, Mr. Dillon had meetings with the directors and the writers,
Hmm.
and made some of the changes that people don't like came from him,
Yes,
including the name of his girlfriend at that
yes,
time, changed her
yes,
name.
yes, and apparently in the movie he goes to see Woody with Pete Seeger. That never happened. That
That
was his
didn't happen.
idea.
Yeah.
So, all of this stuff to me, it was only possible. Again, Mike, you and I haven't seen the movie, but I feel I have now because I know everybody has. This period of time, this little 4 years plus or minus 61 to 65, was dramatically under documented. We had no Rolling Stone magazine. We had no real music journalism at all.
Mhm.
We had very little film and photo coverage. All we have are the albums, really. And we watched this progression of this dramatic music come out from the first album on through Highway 60, well, yeah, 61. Bring Y'all Back Home charitably, but
Mhm.
61
Yeah.
also. And this is, nothing even close from one person. The Beatles were four guys. This is one guy doing it on his own.
Mhm.
And it was a perfect petri dish for myth making because there was so little documentation of the original events. So to take this period of time that is now kind of lore, it's myth because it has been celebrated as such, and make a movie out of it. And the problem with the movie, and many people who have seen it have agreed with me, I said, well, I guess a movie like this can only be peak moment to peak moment because that's how you get 4 years into 2 hours and 20 minutes. It
Mhm.
can't be about watching paint dry, which is you and I know this from the music business part. A lot of the time, nothing happens for a while. You're waiting for a phone call. You're waiting in the studio for something to happen. You're waiting for inspiration. Whatever it is, this is all condensed time. And so it doesn't, your quote of that person, there's a fairy tale aspect to it. And I've seen it in all of these biopics, the ones I've seen, the Elton John biopic, the Queen biopic. It's the same kind of I didn't see the Johnny. Did I see Johnny Cash? Maybe I did. I forgot. But it's the same thing where you're condensing all of this history and this persona into a peak moment to peak moment, and to where what suffers is the coherence of really what happened. They are not documentaries; they are portraits
Mhm.
and interpretations. Mangold did that in the Ford v Ferrari movie, which I loved. I thought it was a great movie, but I later found out I knew a little bit about the subject. I found out later he invented a lot of that stuff in that movie too. A lot of those scenes that look so cool with they were tinkering with the brakes or something that didn't happen. But that's okay because it's a movie. It's supposed to
Well,
be a
like you said, it's not a documentary.
yeah. And so what the end result is, Bob's back in the spotlight for the 5 millionth time. And it's for his persona. It's not necessarily about the music, although people are saying, well, young people will discover Bob's music again. Maybe so, but for the most part, he's of the world. He's a
Mhm.
celebrity. He's arguably the America's greatest songwriter. Okay, Nobel Prize winner, all that stuff. But he's back in the spotlight again because there's a part of him, I believe, really craves that stuff. He really craves being relevant. And when we were working together in the 80s, he was really irrelevant and he knew it. And part of that time, 84, 85, 86, was to somehow buck the tide and turn out arguably not great albums. I don't think. Some people think they were. Brownsville Girl, the one of the songs we recorded is considered one of his greatest. I was fortunate to be on that one. And it is a great song. It's not a great recording, in my opinion, but a great song. And completely going against the tide of what was happening in 1985, 86. So he struggled with that. And maybe what this movie does for him now is it buys him yet another big bunch of spotlights, that celebrate a guy who really deserves to be celebrated.
Well, yeah, he does deserve that, and you're right. It's a celebration in a sense. Uh, and how and he's actually said that he now, and I think even in the last 20 years, he said he couldn't write now what
Oh
he
yeah,
wrote then.
sure.
He said he couldn't write them,
He
which is
told me, he told me we were working on some stuff together, and he said something about not a writer's block, but he said I could do this stuff all day long, and now I can't the same way. And so one of the reasons we got together after Shadow Kingdom, that was just the two of us getting together, was to throw some song ideas around, and we wrote some stuff. And I said, well, all you got to do is take this chord and flip it on its head, change the fingering of it, and we did. And he said, wow, I didn't know you could do that. So I said, yeah, play a C chord this way, don't play it that way, play it this way. And so he needed a change, but I think he ran out of that urgency,
Mhm.
because he's already there. He's on top of the mountain.
Yeah,
There isn't another mountain to climb,
yeah.
except for the fact that I think there's a very strong part of him that wants attention, that wants to be told, I'm still a human being.
Well, I
Uh,
think going back to Minnesota, he wanted to, and I'm just projecting on what I read, but he wanted to be a rock star.
he did.
He wasn't out to be a folkie. Somehow
No,
that
no, he did. His reference points. I have an older brother, the same age, and both musicians, obviously. Uh, their reference points are identical. It's Chuck Berry, it's Little Richard, it's Buddy Holly, uh, throw in Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, all the stuff that those guys were hit with as young guys, in their early teens, that completely changed their lives. Cataclysmic change. And so folk music wasn't even on the horizon for them. But he gets to New York, and guess what? Folk music is all that's happening.
so he does it.
So he does it because
He
that
wants
was
to play his songs and he
he
doesn't have a
told me this
band.
was this was a great one. I said something about electric guitar, and he said, "Well, I got rid of my electric guitar because you had to carry an amp. When I got an acoustic guitar, it was easier to carry around." So I said, "Well, yeah, that made life a little easier. You had one less
And
piece to
now he's playing piano all the time.
now." Well, yeah,
But he doesn't carry that around. It's supplied.
I don't think he carries I don't think he carries his equipment anymore. But I think that you're right. The rock the rock first explosion, 50s rock guys, was absolutely the formative stuff for him. As it was
He played piano. I think this is true. He played piano for Bobby V for a while
Bobby
under
Lee,
another
yeah.
name.
Yeah, he
And
could
the
only
reason I think it's true is that evidently Bobby V showed up at one of his gigs and
yes.
Dylan was crazy about it. He
He
loved
thought he even said he thought Bobby V was one of the best singers he ever heard.
it.
And he was very very generous with his praise of Bobby V.
And
And again, this moment for these guys who are now in their 80s, they were young guys in the 50s, um, it changed their lives.
Hmm.
And everything that followed for Bob or for, you know, Paul McCartney, you could argue, you could say the same thing. It was all because of that explosion that they heard as young people.
Hmm.
And it never left them. It
It
really
was
never.
um, Bobby V. In case there are some listeners who don't know the name Bobby V, and it's possible that it's been a long time, but in the 60s, he was a huge pop star, not a rock star.
Late 50s and 60s, yeah.
Yeah. And but real good pop songs and real good
Yeah.
singing and
He
so on.
was
I actually met him as a kid. I met him.
a talented guy.
Yeah.
Talented guy. And I think also it should be, you know, you could also say this. Those people, the first group, the first wave of the rock people, you know, they were building the road and driving on it at the same time. Nothing
Hmm.
existed. And by the time the 60s, you know, British invasion and all the other stuff, at least there was some, you know, the AM radio was already in place, and shortly thereafter, FM radio kicked in. There was already a little bit of structure, but for the 50s guys, there was nothing.
Nothing.
You know,
Yeah.
they were fighting everything.
Yeah. We're gonna jump into a commercial. We're gonna listen to um, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, which is I find one of the most interesting songs and done by the Animals did this great version of this song. Or
Are you playing
bluesy.
Bob's version?
Yeah.
Are you
Oh yeah,
playing
no, we're playing Bob's version.
are you playing the one we recorded for Shadow Kingdom? Or are you playing the
No, I
original?
think we're recording it. I think it's the original.
Well, before we go to it, let me just add for all the listeners, please listen to the Shadow Kingdom version of it, because it's the one I'm almost most proud of. I think it's just
Wonderful. We'll take a listen. We
it's
should be done,
phenomenal.
but
Yeah.
anyway. All right. Anyway, we're off and running to a commercial. It's the Mike Gormley Show. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with Ira Ingber, a amazing musician with great stories. So we'll wander off into the sunset, listening to "It's All Over, Baby Blue," and we'll be back shortly thereafter. Hmm. Did it end?